Thanks all for coming to this session. Today we've got Duncan Graham, who will talk about structure overview and frameworks while solving consulting cases. Duncan is working at Seek as the Senior AI Product Manager. He also worked at McKinsey as a consultant. And Duncan did his MBA from MBS in 2015. And we're very pleased to have Duncan for this session. And Duncan will talk about structure and overview and frameworks for about an hour, and then we'll do some practice cases for 40 minutes, and then we'll come back and there will be question and answers for the next 20 minutes after that. Over to you, Duncan.
Right, thank you very much. I actually don't have any more left to intro. I've been planning to start with an intro. So I guess outside of everything that you now know about me, I've got 2 kids. And I'm going to a Bucks party today after this. That's a couple of extra snippets. Before we start, does anyone have any questions that they were coming to this session that they specifically wanted to answer?
Yeah, Duncan, I've got one. Richard Williams here. I just I've seen a few of the case frameworks that are different areas or different people sort of promote, and I've just wondered at times, is it a problem if we sort of take some of those frameworks that might be quite popular, like Victor Cheng and the like, that you get into a case and it comes across as, you know, you're not doing your own work and it's not it's just copying something. Do you think that we should do a bit of work to tailor the frameworks to our own understanding and things like that?
Okay, that is a great question, and one that I will cover, which is good. I can anxiety levels can go down a little bit that I've prepared the right material. Does anyone have anything else? Okay, in that case, I'll just get into it. You know, I was once in everyone's shoes, the same shoes as everyone here. It's my MBA in 2015. I interviewed for all of the top tier consulting firms. I was fortunate enough to get a gig at McKinsey. And so I've been through the interview process many times as an interviewee, and then subsequent to getting that job, I've then conducted a number of case interviews. And so I can bring a little bit of my own personal experience from both sides of the ledger, which I'll do. I think structure is one of the areas that people often fall down on, and it can be quite pivotal to getting successfully through a case. And it's important. Different consulting firms think about structure in different ways, but it's important to set up a good structure at the start of a case, because essentially it's going to be one of the first things you do. And then if you get it right, the case is going to be really easy to solve. And if you get it wrong, you might find yourself sort of casting around in the darkness for the rest of the half an hour, trying to figure out what to do next. And actually, it's one of those areas that I found when I was practicing for case interviews before I interviewed, when I was doing my MBA, I actually found quite hard to get my head around. And eventually I realized that it doesn't need to be super difficult. There are just some simple frameworks you can have, to your point, Richard. There are some simple frameworks you can have in your mind that are pretty adaptable, and that actually you can probably solve 90%, or let's say, I'll say 60% of cases can be solved with the relatively simple frameworks. And then the other 40% of cases are just going to be random cases that someone gives you that you're never going to be, like, you're going to have to make up a framework on the spot. And so I'll also give you guys a few tips on how to do that. So I will kick into it. Just have to share my screen. It's the right one. What are you guys seeing? Are you seeing structure, structure, structure? Bring order to the chaos in your mind. Beautiful. Okay, yes. Cool. Problem solvers follow a process. Good problem solvers follow a process. And actually, if you think about what consulting firms do, they actually basically just have a problem solving process, and they drum that into their consultants, and then they take those consultants around to different firms or governments or not-for-profits, whoever it happens to be, and get them to apply that process to whatever the problem happens to be. And you can use this process to solve you can use a good problem solving process to solve any problem. It doesn't matter what the problem is. It could be a problem in your, could be a problem that you're solving for a client. It could be a problem that you're solving just in your day job if you're working for the company directly. It could be a problem that you've got at home. And I've put a process up here, and this process isn't quite the same as, but sort of quite similar to a process from a particular consulting firm that I might have worked for that will remain unnamed. I've dropped one step just to protect, so I'm not giving away any IP, but for all intents and purposes, this is pretty similar to what you might find in a consulting firm. And the steps in the process are: define the problem, structure the problem, prioritize issues, conduct analysis, synthesize insights, and present the answer. Or in the sort of 3 phases: define, analyze, and answer. And if you think about a case, I'm sure everyone's heard this before, successfully getting through a case in half an hour really just requires you to follow these 3 steps. You have to kind of define the problem, which will include articulating back to the interviewer what the problem was that they gave to you. Then you do your structure. And then from that point, you start to get into the analysis. And the analysis will involve you saying, okay, if I'm looking at my structure, what do I think is the most important area for me to probe on first? If you're right, the interviewer might give you some numbers, you might be able to do some analysis, and eventually you'll get to the point where you're like, okay, I think I've collected enough information that I can answer this question. And I synthesize back the insights, and then I say, this is what you should do. And structuring gives you the foundation for doing everything that comes after it. And so if you've got the right structure, then all of these steps should be relatively straightforward. And if you've got the wrong structure, you might find yourself casting around a little bit to get to an answer. This will be different. Actually, I'll just pause here for a sec. This will be different for different consulting firms. So if you go and interview for Bain or BCG, or even I think AT Kearney's like this, and some of the big 4 accounting firms, you'll get what I would call an interviewee-led case. And an interviewee-led case is where the person will typically come in and they'll sit down. Let's say it's a partner at Bain. They'll come in, they'll sit down, they'll ask you a question. How should we do blah blah blah? Should our company enter this new market? And then they'll just look at you, and you have to say, okay, so ask a few questions, define the question, do your structure. You can write down your structure, and then you need to use your structure to ask the questions of this person to get the information in order to answer the case. So you're leading the interview. McKinsey is slightly different. I don't know if anyone else does it this way, but at McKinsey, you will actually, it's an interviewer-led case, and so you'll be asked, 5 or 6 questions, and they'll be set out as questions. Question number 1, tell me how you would solve this problem. That's when you do your structure. Question number 2, and then they'll give you some exhibit, and that's basically like, okay, your structure's done, assuming that you prioritize the issues, here's the exhibit. And then it's like, okay, draw out the insights from this exhibit, do some analysis. Question number 2, another exhibit, some more analysis. Question number 3, another exhibit, some more analysis. By the time you've done those 3 exhibits, you should have seen that there's enough information for you to like synthesize out a recommendation, and you can just proactively give that recommendation. And so it's a little bit more structured. I just see something in the chat. So, oh yeah, screen sharing has gone blank because I pressed the B button. So I'm not actually sharing my screen anymore. Sorry. Just because otherwise everyone's going to be sitting there reading the slides when I'm talking about something slightly tangential to what's on the slide. I'm going to go back. There we go. So, doesn't matter which interview you're in, you're at the point where you need to give a structure. Why is a structure important? A structure essentially breaks a problem down into some manageable chunks that will yield to analysis and will allow you to find an answer. And if you think about the question, should we enter this market? Should we enter this market? I don't know. Should we enter this market? Maybe. And someone who's not very structured will like go, so an example might be, should this tractor company needs to, this American tractor company wants to enter Canada. Should it enter Canada? It's a really successful tractor company. And someone, an unstructured person will go, yeah, it's a really successful company. Of course it should enter Canada. Or yeah, Canada's a big market, or Canada's got lots of agriculture, and they'll just start answering these making these random connections or answering random points based on what sort of happens to pop into their head. That's not going to get you a very good answer. a more structured person would actually break that problem down into a set of manageable chunks. So is the Canadian market attractive? Does this tractor company have a product that is going to resonate with the customer segments? Does it have the capability to enter a new market? And then all of a sudden, once you've asked those questions, how big is the Canadian market? That's easy. You can break that one down again, but that's all of a sudden a tractable problem. Is the product attractive? Well, you can break it down again, but it becomes a tractable problem. And so that's why it's important to have a structure. And what you find if you actually end up going and working for a consulting firm is that the teams will spend a lot of time up front getting the right structure, and they will spend a lot of time debating the right structure, because if you get it right, then you'll probably end up 8 weeks later having had some reasonable amount of sleep and having also given the clients the right answer. Okay, any questions here just before I move on? No? Good structure is MECE. Does anyone not know what MECE is? Mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive. Good. That's the most important thing, to make sure your structure is MECE in an interview. It's not like, don't get so hung up on it. You'll get a little bit of leeway, but MECE is the general principle that sort of guides structure. You don't, or another way to describe it is no overlaps, no gaps. So the way you break your structure down, you don't want to have those sections or parts of your structure be ambiguous. Oh, this concept I've got, does it fit into, is the market attractive, or does it fit into, do we have a good product? If you're asking that question, you haven't got the right structure. The structure should be relevant. Don't bring, don't try and force fit a structure onto a problem just because it happens to be the structure you've got in your head. And then the structure should allow you to get some insight out of the problem. And hopefully you'll see what I mean as I go through the rest of this. Okay, so some tips for setting up a good structure. Yes, you can ask for a moment to draw out your structure. Before I was doing interviews, I was always a bit like in two minds about whether it was okay for me to ask an interviewer, can I take a few minutes to draw out my structure? Yes, it is completely fine to take a few minutes to draw out your structure. You should do that. If you're good enough to be able to draw your structure and talk about what you're drawing at the time that you're doing it, do that. But in my experience, hardly anyone can do that, and you probably come a cropper. You're much better off, and it's much lower risk, and I would be taking the lower risk option, given there's plenty of opportunities to step up in a case interview, to take the time and draw the structure. And number two, use that moment. So if you've asked for some time to draw a structure, don't then feel rushed. I'm going to do an exercise. This is going to feel a bit weird, but I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay, so take note of this moment now. Right, that was 1 minute. That is a long time. It feels like a long time. And if you're in an interview and your stress is up, you're sitting there going, holy shit, I'm taking so long to draw this structure. That's 1 minute. You've got 30 minutes to finish a case. McKinsey interviewer-led case, you'll probably answer 5 questions. So you've got 6 minutes per question. So you could easily take 3 times that, and you would still have plenty of time to spare on that question. Obviously you have to have time to present the case back and debate a little bit. So you have got plenty of time to write a structure, and taking some time to do it is really, really time well spent. And I know that seems a bit weird and it's a bit awkward to just sit there and stare at each other, but that's what you're going to be doing in the interview. 1 minute is probably actually enough to draw out most structures. If you're kind of sure what the structure is, you probably have drawn it in a minute. If you get a question you're not sure what the structure is, you could take a minute just trying to think about what the structure might be, and then another minute to draw it, and you'll still be completely fine. Tip number 3, make sure the structure is meaty, relevant, and insightful. That's a bit of a silly thing to say. You know, obviously you want to do this. Everyone knows you want to do this. It's more about just taking the time to learn some of the common structures and figuring out how to make them work for you. That's good enough. And don't stress too much about it. Go 2 levels deep minimum. This is probably more important. If you draw a structure and you've got 1 level and then one of those boxes has gone to level 2 and then you start launching into it, you've pretty much failed the structure question. Definitely go to 2 levels. You know, unless it's a question that someone has asked you where you have to create your own structure because you can't apply a standard structure. And it may be at that point that, you know, it may only make sense to go to level 2 for 1 or 2 of the arms of your structure. That's fine. But if you're deploying a structure like, how do I enter this market, you know, or how do I increase profit by 50% or something like that, 2 levels deep minimum. Don't stress about making an issue tree. If you want to draw it as an issue tree, draw it as an issue tree. I'm showing them as issue trees in this pack, but I wouldn't actually, because I think it illustrates the concept of a structure, but I wouldn't actually draw an issue tree in a case interview. I would actually just do like a dot dash. I would do the heading and then the sort of sub points below it, another heading, sub points. That's easier. I've seen people turn their page sideways like this, and let's say they've got 4 top levels. They'll put 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, and then just write the bullet points underneath each one. You know, all of those are fine. It doesn't have to be an issue tree. If you feel more comfortable doing an issue tree, fine, do an issue tree. And then number 6, don't overtly use an MBA framework. And I can't stress this enough. If a CEO has paid McKinsey, you know, $2 million to have some consultants come in, and they rock up on day one, they say, oh, you've got a corporate strategy problem. Oh, we're going to do a Porter's 5 forces for you. The CEO is just going to be like, what the fuck am I paying you guys $2 million for? You know what I mean? The CEO could do a Porter's 5 forces while they have a beer on the weekend. So knowing what a Porter's 5 forces structure is and knowing how to apply it and why it's meaty and why it works is really valuable. But don't say that it's a Porter's 5 forces framework, and don't write out the labels so that it's obvious it's a Porter's 5 forces framework. This goes to your question, Richard. Figure out how, if you think you're going to be applying a Porter's 5 forces framework, you can touch on the points that Porter mentions that you know to be true and important, but put it into your own framework. And if you do that, all of a sudden it looks like you've actually thought about the problem and you've understood the problem, and you're not just rolling out something you learned as an MBA student. Does that make sense? So hopefully that answers your question, Richard. Yes, don't use the standard frameworks. Know them and know why they work, and know how the world fits together, which is what they help you do. But definitely tailor them into a way that makes sense for you, rather than just saying, I'm going to roll out a Porter's 5 forces. Or as one lecturer, strategy lecturer, said when I was doing my MBA, when a student suggested that we do a SWOT analysis, the lecturer was like, a SWOT analysis is the sort of analysis you do before you do an MBA. It's kind of like a Porter's 5 forces is the sort of analysis you do while you're doing an MBA, but you're sure as hell not going to do one when you're a consultant.
So if I just follow up on that, Duncan, would you recommend trying to tailor pretty much the framework to pretty much any case? Or I guess some cases might be a profitability problem that's got a pretty generic framework, and so it's probably accepted in those cases, just go generic?
Yeah, if it's really obvious that there's a generic framework, then you should use it. However, it may not necessarily be so obvious. So maybe we just keep going for a little bit, Richard, and we'll see how we go.
Sure.
I've already done my take a minute gag, I call it. So, okay, case start. How can Carco increase annual profit by 50%? So I'm going to get you guys to spend 1 minute doing this. Carco is the biggest car manufacturer in the world. Let's say they're the biggest car manufacturer in North America. They produce a range of cars They do small cars, SUVs, pickup trucks, vans, all of that sort of stuff. They're just branching into electric cars. And they've got a new CEO, and the CEO has set the ambitious target, signed off by the board, communicated to investors that they are going to increase their annual profit by 50% over the next 3 years. How can they do it? So you've got 1 minute now. Okay, that's 1 minute. Everyone can stop. Doesn't matter if you haven't finished your framework. So, quick question. Did it feel like a shorter period of time when you were actually writing your framework down? Yeah. 1 minute. If you know the framework and you've got it in your mind straight up, 1 minute is probably enough time to write down a framework. If you start immediately and you're pretty comfortable that you know what the framework is, doesn't matter. You've still got you could take another 2 minutes and it would be completely fine. So you could have spent that whole minute just thinking, and you still have 2 minutes to draw your framework. It doesn't matter if you didn't get your framework down, but you should have at least in the 1 minute by now have formed a view on what framework you're going to have and started to write it out, and probably started to get into 2 levels for a couple of the nodes. Okay, so how can Carco increase annual profit by 50%? So profit is revenue minus cost. Revenue is price times volume or units sold or whatever you want to do it. Cost is variable and fixed. You could go further down a tree. I just want a quick show of hands on your Zoom. Was this anyone's structure? Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is a MECE structure. And it's mathematically MECE. It's actually a maths equation. So by definition, it's MECE, because otherwise you wouldn't get these operators in here. But it's probably, in fact, if you use this structure, you would have failed the case. And it's a very, very common mistake that MBA students make. You do your MBA, you go to the consulting club, all of these cases rock up and they're profitability cases, and the right structure to use in these cases is profit, is revenue minus cost, etc. And so you use it, you get really comfortable with it. That's where you start. You probably did the Panda case first up or something like that. And then you get into a case interview, and the question was, Carco is the biggest car manufacturer in North America. And it wants to grow. It's in the full, it has a full lineup of cars, from small cars all the way up to pickup trucks. It's moving into electric cars, and it wants to increase its annual profit by 50%. Well, I tell you what, there is no way in a mature industry with a full lineup of cars already as the biggest car manufacturer, it's going to increase its profit by 50% just by raising prices, selling. It's not going to be able to raise its prices. Not going to be able to increase its volume. It's already the biggest. It might be able to get a couple of % out of this, but it's a mature market, and it's sure as hell not going to get it out of its cost base, or it might if it's an incredibly poorly run company, but it's probably not going to be enough. So a better answer would be, also, by the way, if CEO pays McKinsey $2 million and McKinsey comes in and says, all right, CEO, here's how you solve your problem. Profit equals revenue minus cost. The CEO is just going to be like, what the fuck? This is a better answer, and this includes part of the profitability equation, and I'll see what I mean. How do I grow profit by 50%? It looks like a lot. It looks like a lot because I didn't have room on my slides. So I've had to move this arm out here, and I've had to move this arm out here. But this is essentially just a 2-level structure. I've got 4 points and then I've got 2 levels. And it's messy enough. How do I grow profit by 50%? Well, one way I could do it is I could increase my margin. Another way I could do it is I could sell more to new customers, find new markets. Another way I could do it is I could sell new products to existing customers. I could shift my mix. Or the other way I could do it is I could acquire through M&A. That's how I could do it. This is a good case. This is a good structure to know. You don't need to remember. It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to remember everything. But if you've hit these 4 points and you've got most of these down, the consultant's going to be looking at it going, yeah, it's pretty good in a half-hour case when you didn't know what the question was going to be. Increase margin. So the only way you're going to be able to increase margin is increase willingness to pay. You've got to convince your customers. You're probably not going to find more customers. You've got to convince your customers they want to pay more, or you reduce your costs. You sell more to new customers. We have to find a market, figure out how big it is, how fast it's growing, how much share do you think you can take. You could sell new products to existing customers. What are the adjacent markets? What would your value proposition be? How can you develop that product? Can you develop a product that's going to be attractive, or acquire through M&A? Do you have a target? If yes, what's the valuation? How attractive is the market? Do you have the M&A capabilities to pull it off? In that case, you could use the profit formula to do a valuation of a company for an M&A. It's kind of like, well, I need to figure out what my profit is, and then I'm just going to discount the profits by some number. I'm just going to put it on some percentage, and I've got the NPV of the company. Profit. This is a great formula to know, and you may find yourself using it in a number of cases, but you're probably going to use it in questions 3 or 4. If I go back here, once you get to like conduct analysis, you know what I mean? It's likely that you would apply profit at some arm of the case of the structure way down here. And so what a consultant is more interested in finding out from you when they're doing a case interview is like, can you get these big buckets right? This is not a messy structure because this doesn't include M&A anywhere, and M&A is one way that you could grow profit. So, did you get like the top level buckets right? And did you give me enough buckets below that to make me think that you actually know what you're talking about with these? If that makes sense. Any questions on that?
Duncan, quick question.
Yeah.
I start off with the profitability, then I actually had a lot of those elements in, but yeah. I like the logical flow from you going, well, it's not going to be price, it's not going to be fixed costs, it's not going to, I'm therefore, really growing through, let's say, revenue, for example, which a lot of those 4 elements are trying to do. Yeah. Is that a good logical way to set it up before you get to this, or would you go, just bang this structure? Because
great question. So I think there's a section on CEO mindset as one of the topics in the curriculum for the consulting club, and part of CEO mindset, I think, is like having the intuition to know that if I've just described the biggest car manufacturer in North America, with a full product suite, branching into like the latest trend area and growing profit by 50%, you kind of have the intuition to just like immediately go from that. Well, it's going to be hard for them to just grow organically. And it would be really, it doesn't matter if you don't do this, but if you say, well, look, as you give me that information, my hypothesis is that they're going to have to grow through M&A into a new market, grow through M&A or enter a new market outside of North America, because it's going to be really hard for them to grow within North America organically. You're a long way of the way there, because you've basically just demonstrated that you're using, that you've understood the problem. You have a structure in your mind already, which is that, it could be M&A, or it could be organic growth in the market, or it could be entering a new market. So you've already got a bit of a structure in your mind, and you've got a hypothesis of which one of those you would go and test first. And so just saying that here would be really good. Doesn't matter if you don't, but if you do, you're most of the way there. But generally, I would say, take the time to put your structure down and make your structure complete, because it may be that you already know just from this that you've followed the logic and you're just like, bang, I'm going to go straight for M&A. But the consultant still wants to know that you can like come up with a messy structure. So I would actually, I would, if you know enough and you feel confident enough to say, I already have a hypothesis from this, but for the sake of making sure that I don't miss anything, I'm going to do my structure. And then you take your 3 minutes, 4 minutes, you draw the structure out and you say, okay, look, here's the structure. Here are the potential options that they're going to have available to them. And, if I think about what I said before, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be coming from increasing margin. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be coming from selling more, from selling more to new customers. Or sorry, it could be from selling more to new customers outside North America. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be selling new products to existing customers because there aren't really any obvious adjacencies, or it could be M&A. So they'd be the two I want to go for. You're looking really, really good. Now all you got to do is get through 3 maths questions and synthesize, and then you're sweet. And then you've only got another, 5 or 6 case interviews to go for that consulting firm, and you're through. If you set up a structure like this, you're probably going to be able to do it. The maths questions won't actually be that as hard as you think they might be. Okay, cool. So I just want to take time to introduce a good general purpose structure. This is a really good structure to know, and feel comfortable with this, and think about this structure and think about how you would apply it enough that you know why it makes sense. Because what's more important than learning the structure by rote is kind of understanding why it makes sense. You know what I mean? Having a good structure requires you to have a good understanding of the world. A good general purpose structure, pretty much any case question. Customers, competitors, capabilities. I'm pretty sure if you've done Jeff Martin's strategy course, he would have introduced this. He might have added one extra box to this as he's thought about it a bit more. I think when I did it, it was capability/costs. This is a pretty good general purpose structure, and you can adapt it to anything. And Richard, this goes to your question. I would definitely not write down, it won't be the end of the world if you write it down, but I wouldn't write down customers, competitors, capabilities, because then someone's just going to go, generic structure, put it in your own words, but the conceptual buckets are probably right. Customers, how big is the market? How is it growing? What are the customer segments? What are they, what are the trends in that market? Competitors, how many? Is it a fragmented or consolidated market? How big, how much share do the big ones have? How fast are they growing? What are their value propositions? And then what are your company's capabilities? And so I've got over here, what's your position in the market? What's your product portfolio? What are your competitive advantages? Where are the areas you're strong? That's a pretty good general purpose structure. And you can apply that to, like I said, probably 60% of case questions if you put it in your own words. Any questions on that one? Hopefully people are reasonably familiar with this one by now, and hopefully some people have even used it in a case. If you use this in a case and you feel confident using this structure, you'll be pretty right. I think when I was interviewing for McKinsey, I had 6 case interviews, and I would have used this in probably 4 of them. Okay, we're gonna do another case start. Problem statement: should Globofarm buy BioFuture? So Globofarm is a world-leading biotechnology company. It's one of the biggest in the world, and there is a new trend in biotech, which is using AI using AI for drug discovery, and Globofarm hasn't traditionally done a lot of this, and so it's considering acquiring a company called BioFuture, which is really small but growing quickly and developing some really good capabilities in using AI to identify new drugs. And we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and so anyone who can identify some drugs that might be able to be helpful right now is just going to deliver a lot of value anyway. And so there's some potential risk upside. But should Globofarm buy BioFuture? I'm going to pause and let you write out the case. The structure. right, that's a minute. Hopefully you've picked a structure, reasonably progressed in drawing it. Doesn't matter if you haven't finished. You at least should roughly know what your structure is in your mind by now. Right, so hands up if you used your structure or some version of it. Okay. I'm priming you guys. I'm priming you guys to make mistakes. So it looks like a few people didn't fall into my trap, but a few people did. This is actually not a bad structure to use, but you would need to modify it. And I'll tell you what I mean. This is why I say this is a good general purpose structure, because with a little bit of work, you can get this to adapt to a question that may not necessarily seem like it's right. So here's a question for you. For someone who didn't use this, why not?
It's missing some other options within that you could take at a higher level.
Could you give me an example?
So from what I could tell, it's sort of missing what is like Global Farm's capability of growing into the AI capability organically versus looking at BioFarm, BioFuture's, sorry, abilities.
Yeah, great. That's a really good insight. Anyone have any others?
It's kind of
reason?
missing.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, it's missing how much you're going to have to pay to buy them.
Yes, it is. Okay, cool. All right. So that's good enough. So this is a really great structure and it's really versatile and it covers a lot, but it doesn't cover everything you need to cover to answer this question. But I'll tell you what, you don't have to add much. Is BioFuture attractive? It's pretty much this structure, and is BioFuture attractive? And the reason why the rest of it makes sense is because the three big questions you got to answer for an M&A deal or some sort of inorganic growth is the target attractive? Is the market attractive? And that's essentially customers, competitors, and you're just applying these concepts which are just really important to know about any market when assessing a market. Doesn't matter whether you're already in that market or you're going to buy someone in that market. It tells you whether the market's attractive and how you position against your competitors. It's just that you think about, you use the same structure, but you start to talk about it is BioFuture attractive from a financial perspective? How do I do a valuation of BioFuture? Then is the market attractive? How would BioFuture be positioned against competitors? Their value proposition is X, Y, Z. What are Global Farm's capabilities? And so because we're not talking necessarily about Global Farm in the market, although Rashmi, this is where you could talk about your point. Instead of putting in positioning, market, product, portfolio, and competitive advantages, you talk about the capabilities of you focus on. In fact, you could write all 6 of these, but you actually focus on what are the M&A capabilities like? What's our integration capability like? Are we going to be able to access capital? Even though Sven will tell you that access to capital is not a constraint for market entry, it can be a constraint for market entry in the real world rather than the economic textbook world. You could just write them in there. And actually, your top level is more or less the same as up here. And you can still answer an M&A question, and all you just have to do is tack on evaluation of the company. That makes sense for everyone. Cool. All right. So hopefully you can see that you can have a relatively generic structure that you tailor to make sense for yourself. You might call customers the market. You might call, you might have another name for capabilities like company, or, you might actually, every time you do it, you might always write the name of, you might always write the name of the client, Global Farm, or something like that, whatever it happens to be, and that'll work for you. Okay, cool. Anyone got any questions on this one? No? Got one more case start for everyone. Okay, so Seek is a jobs board. It's a really great company to work for, and if you decide that consulting is not for you, Seek would be an awesome place to work. We're always on the lookout for excellent talent. AI is a fast-growing space, and we're investing heavily in AI, and there's super cool stuff going on. Anyway, Seek has great culture, et cetera, et cetera. Seek's a jobs board. Does a few different things. It's a jobs board. it has it covers about 2 billion people. So Seek owns jobs boards all through Southeast Asia and in China, typically the biggest or second biggest in each market. So the catchment area is about 2 billion people, which is pretty huge. It has many ads posted each day and many active candidates. I work in the search team. We have about 600 queries a second, which is a lot. Nowhere near as many as Google. I reckon they would have millions a second, but we still think it's a lot. It's a lot for a jobs board. Our competitors are LinkedIn and Indeed and Google, some super fighting fit competitors with really strong capabilities. And we're trying to figure out how to hold them back, because we're the leader in each of our markets, but those companies are coming at us pretty hard. The question is, and we know they invest a lot in AI, and the question is, should Seek use artificial intelligence to match candidates with hirers? Question. All right, I'm going to give you the minute. In fact, I'll actually give you 2 minutes, so you can spend a minute thinking about it and then a minute writing your structure. So that's 1 minute. So by now you'd ideally have a bit of an idea of what your structure might be, and you'd be sort of into writing it down. And you still got a minute to go to finish writing it down. All right, that's 2 minutes. So 2 minutes, I think if you use 3 minutes to do your structure, then you're in pretty good shape, because it'll take another 3 minutes to talk it through with the interviewer. So we've taken 2 minutes there. Hopefully everyone's made some reasonable progress. Did anyone find this one easy? No? Okay, good, because I do this for a living and it's not that easy to create a structure for. But this is the sort of question that I would ask in a case interview. I use case interviews for interviewing product managers, or when I say I, Seek uses case interviews, strategy style case interviews for interviewing for product managers, and we would ask a question like this. Probably about 40% of the interviews you get will be these style of questions that are just they don't obviously fall into a standard bucket. It's not just like a standard profitability or market entry, or M&A type case. They are real business questions that are actually more like most of the questions that consulting firms would ask. Producing a structure for these is pretty hard. That's okay. It's pretty hard for anyone who has to answer these. What you'll typically find is that if you go and interview for a firm that's like a top tier consulting firm, where you might do say between 4 and 6 interviews, the first half of the interviews will most likely be with more junior members like engagement managers or junior partners or something like that, or even sometimes associates. And you would be doing a much more structured case that usually is a classic business type case. By the time you get to the partners, which are usually the last 2 or 3 cases, all bets are off. They might just give you a structured business case that's a market entry case and fine. They might ask me what sort of case you want to do. I had one senior partner at McKinsey ask me, they're like, what sort of case you want to do? And I'm like, holy shit, how do I answer this question? And you might have others that ask you just questions that are completely random. There was one question that I had from a McKinsey partner that was so random that I can't really say it just in case someone here is interviewed by this person and they probably roll this case out for everyone they interview. But it was just like something they did for not-for-profit. And it was just super not related to business in any way, but it was still a problem that needed to be solved. When you get these sorts of questions, you've got a lot more leeway. I'm not sitting here going, gee, if they don't use this framework, they're dead. All I'm looking for is, have you broken it down into some appropriate, meaty, top-level buckets that are going to be relevant and insightful? And can you push that structure to the next level to make me confident that those buckets can be broken down again in a way that I could do some analysis on? And so I'll just give you a couple of examples. In fact, does anyone want to give me the top-level buckets that they wrote? Is anyone sitting there looking at their structure going, yeah, this is a kick-ass structure. I'd win in this interview. Does anyone want to share their top-level buckets?
I'm happy to share, but I don't think they're kick-ass.
Sorry, I'm just putting the pressure on.
I know.
But yeah, I would love people to share.
Yeah. So I thought back to the customers, competitors, and capabilities and how I'd adapt that. And one of the buckets I thought might be good is just to understand, well, what is the actual value out of AI? Because we don't even know what it makes better. So is it going to have better candidates, produce better candidates, or improve success for those people? And then in the customers one, I thought of customers and users, because you've got people who are posting jobs as well as people applying for jobs. So thinking about them. The competitors I just called positioning. We know who the competitors are, but we want to know how we're positioning against them. And then finally just seeks capabilities in the AI space, and probably capabilities in other spaces as well in terms of rolling out.
Sweet, that's great. Does anyone else? So sorry, I'll just make a comment on this, and I'm happy for someone else to share one if they've gone in a different direction. But that just proves the versatility of this framework. If you've got these 3 things in your mind, like how valuable is it going to be for our customers? Are our competitors doing it, and what are they doing, and how will this help us compete with them? And do we have the capability to do it? Even on a question that doesn't seem like a standard question, if you have those in mind, you're still actually probably going to find yourself getting to a pretty good answer. You just definitely don't want to necessarily call it those labels. That's one where this is one where if you rolled out customers, company capabilities, I would be looking at it going, oh, I feel like it's a bit of a generic framework for solving this problem. But if you use those buckets and you called them something else, and you said candidates, hirers, that show that you kind of understand the business, you're still actually applying that framework, but you're doing it in a way that's tailored to this problem. And then I'd be really impressed, because I think that framework was a really good high-level framework, and probably would have gotten you a long way down the path to solving the case. Does anyone else want to have a go?
I had a slightly different wording, but mine was around what are the actual benefits of AI matching, both to Seek and to its customers.
Yep.
And then I also had, so following that, what are the synergies of AI with Seek's current business? And then what is the cost to Seek of building or acquiring this capabilities? And I sort of split those 2 out.
Great.
And then, so further down, if it's acquiring, what are its M&A capabilities, et cetera, like access to capital issues. And then the last one was, can Seek do better than its competitors in AI?
Yeah, excellent. Okay, cool. Yeah, that would also have been a good structure. And then Anchor, I think you wanted to share yours.
So mine was also on a bit of similar lines. I kind of had three branches starting from Seek. What it means for the hirer, what it means for the candidates, and what it means for the Seek. And I was kind of expanding the Seek tree, like what that capability means, how much cost is it monetizable, can we extract more willingness to pay WTB from the from Seek's customers, and how it fits into its overall business plan.
Okay, cool. Okay,
That's
cool.
right.
So also good structure. So that's good. And I've got a hand up. Did someone else want to share?
Yeah, question. Is it too assumptive to go one level up and ask why they want to use AI? I mean, presumably it's to increase market share.
Look, you could, but here's the thing, right? So if you so typically in a case, you know, the interviewer will give you a question, and then you kind of have to restate your understanding of the question, and then you know, produce a structure. You would be much better off asking that question as part of your structure, and I think Rashmi did this. It's kind of like, you know, is AI a good fit? Like, is AI a good fit for Seek? You know, should Seek be using AI? Is kind of the same as asking why does Seek want to use AI? It's better off answered as part of the structure. The risk if you say upfront, why does Seek want to use AI, is that the interviewer will give you a piece of information like, oh, well, our competitor's using AI. And if you're not really careful, you could get sucked down answering that question and without actually doing a structure. And so if you ask a question like that, that prompts the interviewer to give you some information that they would actually be better off giving you after the structure has been written out, you might find yourself not writing a structure, and you get 4 or 5 minutes in, or even longer, and you realize that you're actually starting to answer questions just randomly, and that's like one of the biggest traps you can make. So I wouldn't ask a question like, I would be careful about asking a question why. I would, if you're asking questions about the actual question that you've been given, should Seek use AI to match candidates? You should ask questions like, to clarify that you've understood it correctly. Okay, so Seek's the biggest jobs board. Is Seek global or is Seek regional? That would be a good question to answer, just to like help you frame what the problem is. But if you're going, why does Seek want to use AI? You'd be much better off asking that in the question of like, you know, is Seek going to be able to use, like, extract value out of this from AI? Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Cool.
Duncan?
Yes, sorry, go for it.
Just on the thread that you were speaking about just now, I went down the path of what's Seek value proposition, what's their positioning currently, and do we want to like, are we using AI to match our competitors, or are we going down the path of differentiation, or, you know, really delivering on the CVP? So how would I best put that in, or is that something you do after the structure and incorporate it in the lower levels of you know, after you've drawn up the structure and discuss it then?
Yeah, good question, Theo. So I think if you're going to like include the CVP, and actually note, I don't have necessarily CVP in this structure, but you could easily put it in there, and you could say, you know, benefit for candidates or benefit for, in fact, you probably put in benefit for Seek, you know, does this align with our value proposition for candidates and hirers? Or you could put it in here as a sub-bullet point. Does it align with our value proposition for candidates and hirers? And I would actually try and put it in the structure. So if you think this is something important, try and put it in the structure. Generally speaking, the point of structure is to say, how do I take this question down to a subset of questions that I think are going to be relevant and might help me answer the question that I can like literally answer. And so one of those would be, you know, does this fit with Seek's customer value proposition? One of them would be, does Seek have the capabilities to do it? And so, yeah, generally speaking, I would be trying to locate those within the structure. If you just have a structure where the top level is like, how well does it fit with the CVP? And are our competitors doing it? You might actually miss the point around, do we have the capabilities to solve it? So you might be going a little bit too high up if you go CVP and competitors straight up. All right, here's another tip for you. Actually, I didn't write this down, but If your structure's got less than 2 points at the top level, it's probably not right. Typically, there'll be more than 2. And if you've got 2, maybe they're missing, but they're probably not that insightful. You probably still end up with 2 questions that are too big to answer. And so, once you get to 3, you're starting to feel pretty good. If you got to 5, then, you're probably 3 to 5, you're probably in the zone. Once you get beyond 5, you're probably starting to pull some of these points that should actually be sub points or something higher level into the top level. And you only want to be doing that if you think that it's going to be really critical to answering a question. So here are some possible answers that I would be happy if someone gave me, what's the size of the opportunity from doing this? How many customers do we have? How many hires do we have? What's the percentage increase in applications we might get from better matching? Do we have the capability to solve this? Do we have the data scientists? Do we have the data? Do we have the technology? What might the strategic benefits be of this to seek? And this is kind of this Theo is probably actually more where I'd be thinking about the CVP element. Does this strengthen our value proposition in market and make it harder for our competitors to get a foothold? Can we block our competitors? Do we access new segments? Do we learn new capability, etc.? Likewise, you could go with this and it would be equally good. Benefit for candidates, benefit for hirers, benefit for Seek, ability to execute. And actually, people have come up with stuff that I didn't have in my structure, and that's completely fine. Any of these structures, these structures are going to allow you to answer the question, including other factors in there, like, do we just want to acquire, capabilities to solve? Do we have these? No. Do we want to acquire? You might add that in there. Great. That's an even better structure. But either of these would be good enough to get you through the case. All right, cool. I'm just going to restate the tips. And then I think the plan is for you guys to do some case practice, and I'm happy to stick around and help people out for that. Ask for a moment to draw out your structure. Hopefully you're feeling comfortable that a minute is actually a long time and 2 to 3 minutes is perfectly reasonable to take, and you should be able to draw a reasonably good structure in that time, so use that moment. Make sure the structure is MECE relevant and insightful. One way, actually, the point around your question, Richard, around should you tailor it, partly fits in here, which is like, if you do company customers, competitors, capabilities, but you reword it so that it actually fits the problem, instead of saying capabilities, you write Global Farm. All of a sudden, it looks like a relevant case structure. Go 2 levels deep. Don't stress about drawing it as an issue tree. I would write it like this on a letter A4 piece of paper. If I was writing, I would just write it down like that. It doesn't matter, whatever works for you. And don't use 4 to 5 forces or a SWOT analysis or anything like that. And that would be it's like a death sentence. Okay, cool. Any final questions?
Duncan, I've got a quick one. In terms of getting your structure right, what's your margin of error? If you don't get it right, are you completely stuffed? And what if you realize down the track, you kind of going, oh, I don't know if I got this right at the high level? Yeah,
great question. Okay, so when Rashmi answered this question, she had in there, should I acquire this? Should I build this capability or should I acquire this capability? I'm sort of paraphrasing. I haven't seen the structure, but I think you had that in there, Rashmi. That's not in either of these. It's not in either of these. If it turned out that as the interviewer, I was actually angling towards acquiring a company that has AI capabilities as a way to build the capability within Seek, and you drew this out, I'd be looking at it going, it's a pretty good structure. Andrew clearly knows how to write a structure. He's got these sort of top levels are roughly right in the right level of abstraction. He's pushed to level 2. He's got some really sensible stuff here. He hasn't put in M&A. I would just prompt and I'd say, oh, okay, so capabilities to solve, people, data, technology. So, what might you do if you can't do that? And you should be thinking, oh shit, I've forgotten M&A, and you put M&A in there. That's fine. And actually, I would say in most cases, when someone's doing a structure, you'll get prompted for, is there anything you're missing? And sometimes that'll be because you are actually missing something, and on reflection, you can fit something there. Sometimes it'll just be a question to sort of like say, are you done? Either way, so feel free to like look at your structure and say, no, this is a sensible structure, I'm happy to go with it. Or throw it back to the interviewer and say, no, I'm pretty comfortable with it. Is there something there that you have in your mind that you don't think fits within that structure, and see what they say. But it also gives you an opportunity to look at it and say, oh, actually M&A, and if they've got something specific in mind, they'll probably try and steer you towards that, especially if you put a reasonable structure out. If you've done a structure that's a mess and is missing, like it's clear you don't know what a structure is and you're missing important points and whatnot, including one or two of the points that they're thinking about that are critical for the case, they'll probably by that stage have just gone, okay, doesn't know how to write a structure. So they'll just be moving on and looking to get out of the interview as quickly as possible. Does that make sense? So you've got a margin for error is what I'm saying.
Great,
provided you've demonstrated that you know what you're doing.
I'm guessing if you're really far off, you're probably not ready to.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. It's pretty rare. Like, no one here is going to go in there and look like a dope. If you've been coming to consulting club and, you've done like leading up to interviews, if you've done, let's say, throughout your MBA, you've done, an interview between, let's say, 1 and 4 interviews a month. And then leading up, in the month leading up to interviews, you're kind of doing 1 every day or 2 days. There's no way you're going to turn up there and get this wrong unless you've literally been practicing the wrong thing over and over and over again. So the fact that you guys have come to this hopefully means that you won't do that. But it does happen. Sometimes people do come in, they're completely unprepared and they stuff the structure up, and that's it's actually pretty awkward. So okay, cool. Did any of them benefit from knowing the generic case that is adaptable to most problems?
I found it was a double-edged sword because it's kind of like you look at a case and you start to think it through, and then you go, oh, like what if you draw a blank? And so then you look at that and you go, okay, great, I can work with this. But then you sometimes miss thinking of things that you may have organically thought of because you're trying to fit it into boxes.
Yeah, okay, great insight. So there is a risk with knowing a generic structure like customers, companies, capabilities, or whatever the structure happens to be, is that you get so used to applying it, you apply it so often that you kind of go there by default, and next thing you know, you've drawn your structure and you've drawn that and it doesn't actually apply because you're trying to answer whether or not Seek should use AI to match job seekers or something like that. It is always useful just to take, that's why I kept stressing that you've got a minute just to think about it. Like, if you don't consciously say to yourself, I'm going to take some time to think about this, you might, under the pressure of the moment, just like start drawing out that structure, which is kind of like rolling the dice, and the dice are loaded. You're probably going to be okay to use that structure, but it may not be. And so taking the time up front to just go, okay, give me 10 seconds. Here are 2 or 3 structures that I'm comfortable with. Can I use any of those? And that'll say, that'll apply. Yes, great. If no, okay, I'm going to have to come up with something myself. Even if one of the advantages of of having like a relatively flexible structure like the one we were talking about in this session is that you can actually write that structure down, and you can still say at the end of it, oh, actually, I really need to figure out something else. And you can just usually bolt it on into that structure somewhere, and you can kind of save your bacon towards the end. That's the other advantage of it. Anyone else have any reflections?
So one of the national logistics case in the problem, it talked about the client looking to reduce operational costs in the business, and then the structure talked about looking at profitability as a whole, and eventually got back onto focus on cost. But I guess where the problem does focus on operational costs, for example, I assume you should still go and look at profitability more broadly in your structure rather than just honing in on costs. Yeah,
great. So you should. So if it starts to steer you towards operational costs, note that it's steering you towards operational costs. still draw out a structure that is relatively complete, because demonstrating that there may be other factors that you would want to consider here is valuable. And then if you do a structure that's relatively complete, and then you get to like the profitability part, which is, obviously revenue and cost, you can say, hey, look, we have a hypothesis that it is operational cost that we need to look at. It would be worth at least acknowledging that there might be something that's worth looking at from a revenue perspective, or market dynamics or something like that. Is there anything that you know about that might be happening with competitors, or do you know about the overall market? Is it growing or declining? That would be useful to factor in. And if the interviewer genuinely just wants you to focus on operational costs, they'll usually just go, no, let's go to operational costs. Great. You've got your full structure there, and now you're just going down the priority arm, which is operational costs, and you can spend your entire time doing operational costs.
Thanks.
I had another question. So sort of along the lines that Andrew said about the organic thoughts. So in that, I did the national logistics case as well, and I started thinking about the automated trucks as well. And I was like, am I just going too far and too, like futuristic, or am I still sticking to the case? Like, where do you draw the line? Like, can you bring in that lateral sort of thinking? Bring in lateral thinking, for sure. Bring in lateral thinking. Don't go wild, but like bring in lateral thinking. Typically an interviewer will have given the same case over and over again. In fact, most interviewers will give the same case over and over again forever. They might change it once every 5 years or something like that. And that's because they start to build up a baseline of what's good and what's bad from watching different people do the case. And, if you're talking about a top tier consulting firm, they might interview every 6 months, they might interview, let's say, 40 or 50 people. And then they might hire, 5 of those. You actually need to be one of the people who stands out. And so rolling out a structure that's right is really important, but actually also being able to hit on some points that are really interesting and insightful and demonstrate that you can think about this in a way that other people can't is also really valuable. And so, if it's a trucking one, you could still have a relatively simple structure that includes, market and competitors. You could actually talk about, AI powered trucks, or drone delivery services, disrupting trucking and logistics businesses. You could talk about that within that framework, either in the market section or within, most likely, in the competitors section. You can say, look, here are our traditional competitors, but are there any other startups out there looking at this in different ways? AI powered trucks, drone deliveries, whatever it happens to be, catapults, you can bring that in there, and the interviewer might look at you and go, hey, that's really interesting, but no, we're actually focused on operational costs, and then you just go to operational costs. Fine. But you'll actually, you will get a better mark from doing that than if you just go straight to operational costs, to your point, Nick. Thank you.
I guess, Duncan, sorry to jump in, just like on that note, with those examples, would it be worthwhile clarifying on what timeline they want to be reducing their operational costs? So obviously going these big extreme, like futuristic ideas, you can't just like buy them and launch them tomorrow. So like that might come into it as well. Yeah, sure. So sorry, that's a really good one. So Rashmi, sorry, I was thinking AI powered trucks and drone delivery services more in the competitive space, and you were sitting there saying these are options to cut your operational costs, which is actually something I would probably focus on more at the end of the case. So, I'm sitting there looking at it. I've given a few thoughts about the structure, et cetera. We realize that it's operational costs. So we focus on it and we say, okay, what's the current cost base? What levers do we have available to us to pull that we can use to decrease costs? And that's the point at which you might bring in we should be considering things like AI to automate, driverless trucks, drones, catapults, et cetera. That's probably a good point to start to talk about that sort of stuff.